Welcome back to our series on the three angels' messages in Revelation chapter 14. We've been talking about why Adventists make such a big deal about this text. Now, up until this point, we have covered the messages themselves, and now for this, our last video, we're going to talk about why Adventists see the angels as speaking to different periods of history. If we haven't met before, I'm Matthew. This is Peoria Adventist. It's a channel all about showing Seventh-day Adventism to internet people like you and like me. That involves explaining what Adventists believe or showing what our particular church in Peoria is up to and just, I don't know. I just got off sabbatical for the last 6 weeks, so what are we even doing here? How does this work? Anyways, let's take our time machine back to 1899, that famous year when the first man died in a car accident in England. Dare I say, it was probably because he was driving on the wrong side of the road.
Cassie? Oh, wrong side of the road!
Anyway, our interest lies actually back in America, where an Adventist preacher named Stephen Haskell was giving a Bible study at 5:30 in the morning. And I know what you're thinking. I didn't use my time machine to go back to 1899 just so I could wake up at 5:30 in the morning. But hear me out, because Haskell is teaching people about the third angel's message, and he asks the question, what event immediately follows the third angel's message? And the Bible study group answers, the coming of Christ. And sure enough, right after the third angel's message in Revelation 14, we do find a scene of Jesus' return. Now, Haskell also picked up on the language of Revelation 14. We have a first angel, then another angel, and then a third angel follows. They're following one after the other. There seems to be a sequence in order in which these messages are given. So, the three messages are given toward the end of time, just before the second coming, and they seem to go in a particular order. And this is why Adventists see these messages through a historical lens, that is, they take place in history. Now, we've been talking in this series about a very idealized interpretation of these angels. They go forth with universal principles about worship and judgment and God and evil and good, and Adventists are totally cool with that. That is one way to look at them. It's beautiful and it's true, but Adventists also see that historical line of interpretation which ties these messages to historical events. And in order to understand this, we need to talk about where these interpretations came from, that is, the Millerite Movement. Now, we don't have time to get into the entire Millerite Movement and all the stuff that happened, and that's a video on its own. So I'm going to put some resources in the description below. If you're curious, you could read all day long about that. But the short version of it, the Cliff Notes version, is that the Millerites were a movement during the Second Great Awakenings led by a Baptist preacher named, you guessed it, William Miller, who believed Jesus was going to return, he said, about 1843. This would later be revised to honor before October 22nd, 1844, and this is because of their interpretation of Daniel 8:14. Now, these Millerites are not Seventh-day Adventists. They were a coalition of Christians from various denominations, and they would go in various directions, including the direction of Seventh-day Adventism. Some of them would. And it was these Millerites who initially tied the three angels' messages to history, something that Seventh-day Adventists would later adopt and modify. Okay, the first angel calls people to return and worship God because the hour of his judgment is at hand, which to these early Millerite Adventists, lowercase a Adventists, coincided with William Miller studying his Bible and beginning to warn people that Jesus would return in just a few years. So this angel, they say, really began about 1840. This Millerite movement, which was bigger than William Miller himself, okay, as I said, it was really an interdenominational coalition of preachers and believers and editors and writers who all in their own way were trying to spread the word that Jesus was returning soon. We don't know how many of them there were. Some estimates are 50,000 or 100,000 or 150,000, and they didn't all agree on theology or prophecy, but they did agree that Jesus was coming soon and that people had to be told about it. There was no centralized authority. There was no financial monster that needed to be fed. No one's getting rich off of this. They belonged to different churches, and seemingly overnight, this diverse group of people just woke up, and everyone more or less worked in their own way. So they naturally saw themselves as embodying the work of this first angel. They were warning the world of God's impending judgment and then calling them, that is the world, back to worship their true Creator. Now, the second angel, who has this message about Babylon being fallen, is said to have started his call in the summer of 1843, about the time when the various churches to which these Millerites belonged, they didn't leave their churches in order to go talk about Jesus returning. They still belonged to these churches, and some of these churches were getting tired of this whole thing. They were getting tired of their members agitating about Jesus returning soon, and some of them were forced out of their churches. This caused a lot of pain, a lot of heartache, a lot of frustration, and so the earliest Millerites, like most Protestants at that time, I should say, saw Babylon, the Babylon in Revelation, as the Roman Catholic Church. But when their own Protestant churches began disciplining them and chasing them out for their belief, their insistent belief in the Second Advent, then Millerites began to think that their churches were persecuting them, and it felt a little bit like what we've been talking about, the Catholics persecuting the Protestants or others that they considered heretics. So maybe they're two peas in a pod, right? Maybe Babylon includes these organized churches as well. Now, it should be said that William Miller was not enthusiastic about this interpretation. It was really just something that developed in his movement and ran like wildfire. So this call that we find in Revelation 18:4 to come out of Babylon, come out of her, my people, was a call that echoed through the Millerite movement to come out of these churches. Now, the third angel actually wasn't really that prominent during the Millerite movement. They didn't have much to say about it. They kind of agreed that it was like the second angel, and it was a call against Roman Catholics. And it would be Seventh-day Adventists, technically Sabbatarian Adventists before we became Seventh-day Adventists, who would develop this third angel the most. But let's back up and talk about the first angel again and how Seventh-day Adventists would develop this one. Basically, not a whole lot. Early Seventh-day Adventists saw the first angel very much like the Millerites did. Yeah, Jesus didn't come back in 1844, but he's still coming back soon. We should still be ready. We still believe that we're not setting a date. Adventists never set a date. But unlike the Millerites, Adventists did add one thing. That is the investigative judgment. This judgment that the first angel talks about, well, they stood the reason that if Jesus, when he returns, is going to bring his reward with him for the good and for the bad, then he would have had to have decided before he returns who gets the good gift and who gets the bad gift, right? And so this is what they called the investigative judgment. That's something they added to the first angel. When it came to the second angel, again, Adventists tended to maintain their old Millerite interpretation that Babylon was composed of these hostile Protestant churches, including the Roman Catholic Church. Now, Adventists in these early days were anti-organization. It's Seventh-day Adventism's punk rock phase. And so they broadened the critique to any organized church. Babylon is any organized church. We're not going to organize. God's true Christians were to leave these old organized churches with their creeds and their rules and just join this as yet nameless movement of believers who thought Jesus was coming soon and wanted to live faithfully for him. It's a very hippie movement for Adventism. Anyways, then we get to the third angel again. This is where Seventh-day Adventists did far more than merely tweak the Millerite view. The third angel's true message, one Adventist founder said, was for God's people to hold fast, to be patient, to remain faithful, and he identified it with the summer of 1844. This is when the third angel started giving his message. Right, and this is, of course, because a similar message had been given to the Millerites that summer. And what's more, with the rediscovery of the Sabbath, the fourth commandment, Adventists saw new meaning in verses like Revelation 14:12, where God's people are defined as having the commandments of God. So the rediscovery of the Sabbath, they realized, was part of this third angel's work. And of course, the first angel, as we've seen, borrows language as well from the fourth commandment, from the Sabbath commandment. So the Sabbath must be a really big deal towards the end of human history because we see glimpses of it in these angel messages. Now, as the sting of 1844 wore off and different generations of people joined the Seventh-day Adventist Church, well, Adventists would always keep tweaking their understanding of the three angels, and especially that third angel. Ellen White would later add that the third angel's message is righteousness by faith or salvation by faith alone. So the third angel in particular, he's accumulated historical meaning for past far past the events of the 1840s. Adventists had come to conceive of their own mission to the world, their reason for being, as delivering these angel messages to the world. And as they grew and as they learned things, their understanding of the third angel would grow to incorporate the new ideas and points of emphasis that they were learning. So the third angel basically has come to stand for, I guess, the most urgent things the world needs to learn about God right now. The present truth, as Adventists would call it. Now, this was a lot. I get it. Take a breath, will you? And I understand that if you're hearing this for the first time, there's probably a lot of question marks about the Millerites and how these interpretations changed over time. But we simply cannot talk about how Adventists understand the three angels without talking about how they are rooted in Adventist history. It isn't just some great theology to proclaim to the world. Adventists, from the very, very beginning, saw these three angels' messages as having particular relevance to people right here and right now. Well, that'll do it for our 5 parts on the three angels' messages in all their idealistic and their historical lines of interpretation. I hope it was helpful or insightful. If it was, leave me a comment below. Let me know what you liked or, even what you didn't like. Or if you have any ideas about what videos or topics that we should cover in the future. Of course, while you're rooting around down there in the comments section, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Pastor Matthew, and I'll see you next time.